How are you all? So, my name is Paul Robin. I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor for Innovation here at the University of California, San Diego. It's quite a mouthful. And I'd like to welcome you all to Evening with an Entrepreneur. And we have quite a program for you guys this evening. Before I start, though, I wanted to thank the companies outside. In case you didn't realize as you walked in, there's a whole bunch of companies that are showcasing their companies. And it's terrific to see them. If you haven't talked to them afterwards. I think you'll be quite impressed. And there's quite a mix of companies. I just wanted to make the point that, you know, there's some from UCSD and from the Rady School of Management. There's some from the community. There's one from Virginia who is actually relocating here. And that's what we like to see, right? So I'd also like to thank the Rady School of Management and LADA. We are co-hosting this program tonight, and in a few minutes she'll tell you a little bit about her programs. But before we start, Greg is actually introducing our speakers, but I did want to say a couple of words about each of them. Joe Panetta, our President and CEO of Biochemistry. I would say that nobody does more than Joe to promote and advocate and support the life sciences cluster that we have here in Southern California, and particularly in San Diego. We have a very strong cluster, as you guys all know. I think it's ranked as number 2 now. It's ranked in the nation, or close to it. And if Joe has his way, and we all have our way, it's very soon going to be number 1. Joe is also a very big supporter of the university in many different capacities, so that's terrific too. Tina really represents the engine of this economy here. You know, she is amongst those motivated, resourceful, inspirational serial entrepreneurs that's really driving the economy here. And she's had, and will continue to have, a very successful career from her days in Hypertech all the way now to Molecular Stethoscope, right? Which is a very cool name for a company, by the way. So I'd just like to, before I hand it over to Lad, I'd just like to thank you both for everything that you do for our region, for your support of our university, and Tina's a great supporter as well, and also for being here tonight. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Lada.
Thank you, Paul. So my name is Lada Rasochová, and I am Executive Director of SEED, which is an institute at Rady School of Management that is an umbrella over various entrepreneurship programs and accelerators. One of the accelerators is called My Startup XX. The XX stands for female chromosome, actually. And this accelerator is co-sponsoring this event. Let me tell you, for those that you don't know about what this accelerator does, but it is a 6-month-long program for teams or early-stage companies that have at least one co-founder or member of the management team, a female. Some of the companies that went through our program are actually displaying outside, so I encourage you at the end of the event to check them out. They are really great. We are very happy to co-sponsor this event. It means a lot to us. And Tina is our inspiration. So thank you. And let me introduce you to Greg, who is going to introduce Tina.
And if we could have Tina and Joe come up, and so we can get started, come up and sit here. We'll kind of take this around just so I don't get you guys. Well, thank you for being here. The reason we created this particular program is we believe that entrepreneurship is not only learned in the classroom, but it's also learned through experiences, and even more important, through the stories that we tell. We believe that these stories reveal a lot about kind of the journeys that people take, the ups and downs. And instead of just reading about all the successes that entrepreneurs have, sometimes you learn more about entrepreneurship from what didn't go well. And we purposely bring people together who actually know each other pretty well. So Joe and Tina have known each other for quite a while. I've known Joe and Tina for a long time, and so I know you're going to enjoy not only the banter, but also some of the stories that come forth. And so at this point, I will turn it over to the two of them to actually say a little bit about what they do, and then Joe, you can begin the interview.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Greg. I think Paul pretty much explained what I do. So I mean, tonight I'm the man who accompanied Tina Nova to the Roth Auditorium. So I'd rather really get into the conversation with you. And Greg's right. We've known each other probably 20 years. Friends, good friends, colleagues. She was actually my boss for a year. We'll talk a little bit about that. Truly an inspiration to all of us in the biotech community here. One of the pioneers in life science in San Diego. I think she was about 12 when she got started here. We'll talk a little bit about that. But I'm not going to give you a bio on Tina Nova to begin with, because we're going to kind of go through that in this conversation. So before I start, would you like to say
Thank
anything?
you. I just would like to thank you so much for doing this with me. And we've known each other a long time, and some of us cover our gray and some of us don't. Because
boy, here
we
we go.
like to lie about our age, quite frankly. No, we've known each other for a long time, and it's an honor to be here with you. And you really represent the community, the biotech community, and it wouldn't be what it is today without Joe Panetta. And I want to thank Paul and Radha and Greg for inviting me and for being so kind. And you know, everyone at your office looks at you every day like, oh, it's you again. Then you come to a place like this, and everyone's like, oh, it's so great to have you. And you're like, maybe I'll just stay. So thank you. It's a real honor to be here, and I really mean that. Thank you.
Well, you know, to begin with, Paul mentioned that we're the #2 biotech community in the country. You know, everything's relative. It all depends upon how you measure things. And I think what truly makes us the #1 biotech community in the country here is that we've got such a close-knit community of folks who work so well together, collaborate together, support us at Biocom, as Tina has over many, many years, and collaborate in science and research and development here. There's no place like San Diego. So I don't care what the rankings are when you look in Forbes or wherever. We're #1 in ways that, first of all, I think Tina exemplifies the ways that we're #1 here. And it takes a certain kind of person to come here to this environment. We'll talk a little bit about that. But, you know, ego has never been an issue in San Diego. In other places, it is. But here, we do great things, but ego never gets in the way. And Tina's done truly amazing, fantastic, pioneering, successful things here in San Diego. But I've never seen a bit of ego when it comes to all of that. But we know, we all know. So let's do a little Tina Nova, this is your life.
When you get called a pioneer, you know you're old. You can see the covered wagon now. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know you grew up in the Central Valley in Delano.
Central Valley.
Strong Greek ethnic background.
Yes.
Your first generation
Yes.
American.
Yes.
How did all of that play a role in your,
Oh, gosh.
in
So-
your life and career?
Yeah, Central California, Delano, California. Has anyone ever been to Delano? Just what I thought. Has anyone driven through Delano going to a better place? Yeah, exactly. On Highway 99. And usually people say, oh, I've been to Delano once. I stopped there for gas. I went to McDonald's, and it was 110. I go, yep, that was the place.
And they grow a lot of grapes.
And they grow a lot of table grapes there, and that's really what it's known for. So if you look up Delano, California on the internet, and it says it's a great place to eat, I'm not joking, it has a picture of El Pollo Loco. It says it's a great place to play, and it has a picture of a casino, which wasn't there when I grew up, and it's just this little building on the side of the road. It's not like a casino, it's a casino. And it has a picture of all the clubs in town. So there's the Lions Club and the Rotary Club and all the other clubs, and that's really, really important. When I grew up there were about 6,000 people. Our high school served all the little small towns around, Early Mart and Pixley and McFarland, and all those wonderful towns you've never heard of. And it was amazing, but it's right now it's about 50,000. And the reason there's so many people there now is not because it's such a great place and everybody moved there. It's because they opened a prison. And so the prison population now counts as the population. True story. And I think Charles Manson is there, one of the Menendez brothers, and it changed the town in a really positive way. So that's the town I grew up in. And so I look back and I think, oh my God, how did I do that? And it was an amazing place to grow up. It was great.
And little known fact, I didn't even know this, that you have a relationship with Cesar Chavez's family.
That's right.
Right?
So Cesar Chavez lived in Delano. He was born in Yuma, Arizona, but he lived in Delano, and that's where he started the farm labor movement. And my mother worked full-time, and his mother and his grandmother babysat me when I was a child. So I was at his house all the time, and I remember everyone saying, "Oh, he's so famous." I'm like, yeah, I know him. They're like, "What? What do you mean you know him?" Like, "Yeah, I know him." And yeah, it's pretty amazing. So all the politicians came to Delano when I was a kid. The Kennedys came, everybody came because they came to be, with Cesar. So it was pretty amazing from that standpoint.
Did you, you were pretty young back then, right? You were babysat by his mother and his
I
grandmother.
was very young.
Just want to get
I know
that
it's hard to
straight.
believe that I was young once, but yes, it was very, yes, exactly.
All right.
So I think he was born in like 25, 26, so yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay, so kind of got the picture of Delano.
Yes.
I can imagine growing up in Delano as a young woman at Delano High School.
Delano High School.
I can imagine even then some of the ambitions you must have had,
Yeah.
which probably didn't involve riding a tractor.
No. No, but my dad did put me on a tractor when I was about 10 years old, and I raked hay. So my sister, who was 3 years younger, she raked every other row, and I raked every other row, and this big, huge hay rakes, and I had my own Farmall and John Deere and Case tractor. And my dad said to us, "If you girls don't go to college, this is where you're going to end up." So talk about motivation. And my sister was a big daydreamer, so her hay rows always looked like this, and mine were always perfectly straight. So I wanted to be the differentiator between my sister and myself. And so I was put on a tractor I drove when I was 8 years old, a Willys Jeep, and when I was at Hypertech one day, I moved a forklift because it was in the way, and nobody could believe it. You know how to drive a forklift? I'm like, yeah, doesn't everybody?
Well, okay, so Delano High School.
Yeah,
When you were at Delano High School,
yes.
did you have ambitions of
Yes.
going into science?
Yes.
Did you have the slate of classes at your fingertips at Delano and take whatever it
Not
took for you?
quite. So
No?
Delano High School was not what we would call college prep. And so we had a fabulous auto shop class. We had welding. We had homemaking. The girls took homemaking and sewing, and the boys took auto shop welding. And so it was very clear that the girls didn't take these classes, the boys didn't take these classes. That's just the way it was. And we didn't have college prep classes. I didn't even know what calculus was until I went to college and learned out really quickly. And so one day I decided to see my counselor, and I said, I'd really like to take mechanical drawing. And he said, "Tina, that's only for boys." And I said, I know, but I'm thinking maybe I'd like to be an architect. And so I'd really like to take that class. And he said, "No, you can't take that class." I said, "Well, what if I go to the teacher and he lets me take it?" He goes, "He's not going to let you take it." I said, "Okay." So I left. So encouraging. And so I went to the teacher, Mr. Hyatt, and I told him that I really wanted to take the class. And I kind of exhausted him, like I usually do. And then he looks at me and goes, "Okay, fine. You can take the class, but you have to sit in the front row. And you better not bother the boys." I have been bothering the boys ever since. So I sat in the front row, of course, put my head down and did my work. And he made a big point. My counselor made a big point of the fact that I had not taken homemaking. I said, "I hate cinnamon rolls, and that's all they do." And he was just shook his head, like, "There's just no hope for you." And yes, I wanted to get out of town as fast as possible.
So mechanical drawing was your ticket out of town,
It
basically.
was sort of my ticket out of town, yeah.
Did you have, so this is probably, given what you said, probably a dumb question. So you didn't have AP chemistry or?
Oh gosh, we didn't.
any of
No,
that?
no.
None of that stuff.
What's AP stand for? That was for Alpa, the town next door. No, there was no such thing. No, getting out of town was actually more complicated because, as you mentioned, my parents were Greek, and I was a first-generation American, and I was a girl, which really messed everything up. Because in the whole Greek culture, men, you have your boys first because they're the ones that inherit the farm and inherit everything, and they take care of their little sisters. So when I asked my parents why my name was Christina, my parents said, well, we didn't know you were going to be a girl. We thought we were having a boy. And I was like, didn't you have a 50-50 chance? And they were like, yeah, but we thought we were having a boy. And so I'm like, oh, great. And so they said, so at the hospital we had to decide a name quickly. I'm like, okay, that's really great to hear. And by the way, you're not going to inherit anything, so just plan on it because everything goes to the boys. And my parents were wonderful people. I know this sounds just horrible. It was their culture. It's where they came from. And they were absolutely wonderful, but they made it very clear to me that they wished they'd had a boy first, and they hadn't planned on having a girl, and everything was going to my brother, who was 3, and I could really see that made a lot of sense. And I said, well, what am I supposed to, well, your husband's supposed to take care of you. I'm like, oh, great. And then my grandparents, who lived next door, the big fat Greek wedding, brought a guy from Greece like right before I left for college and tried to talk me into marrying him. And I was like, there is no way I'm marrying that guy. And so I told my parents that, well, what if my husband dies? And then it'll be great if I had an education. So if I go to college, that'll be better. My grandparents said, that's a wonderful idea. So I got out of town because I told them I needed to prepare for my husband dying. Yeah. So that was the start. But once I got out of town, everything was fine. I never came back. Me and my stereo speakers that were about this big.
And when you decided to get out of town and go to college, was there a lot of experience at Delano High School with women leaving and going to college?
No, junior college, but not going to a university. And my counselor thought that was crazy. He said, you've got a great boyfriend. He's a great farmer. You should just marry him, Tina, and stay here. I'm like, wow, the biggest accomplishment I'll have is what's for lunch. I was like, no, I'm not doing that. So I went to UC Irvine very unprepared, very unprepared.
And you went to UC Irvine, and UC Irvine at the time was actually probably one of the newer.
It was
UC
like San
schools,
Diego.
right?
Yeah, like San Diego. It was a great school. I loved it. And I got there, but it was really rough for me at first because I really had to get caught up way before, I hadn't had anything. I hadn't had any college prep classes, so I had to take all college prep classes at first before I could get caught up. And I was a science major. One reason I was a science major is my dad said, if you're not a good major, I'm not paying for you. If you want to be a fine arts major, I'm like, I can't sing or dance, Dad. What do you mean I'm not going to be a fine arts major? I love science. And he goes, okay, that's good. So I loved it, and I got caught up and just went from there.
Pre-med, you started out pre-med?
Pre-med, yes.
Was it, why
Yes.
was that so? Did someone say to you,
Well, if you're a
you
science
should be a
major, you
doctor?
should be a pre-med. Yeah,
Right.
and that's what you should do. And I thought that's what you did if you were a science major. And so I went along that track for a long time.
We were in college about the same time, right?
Yeah.
And I can identify with this because I remember I started out a pre-med major because if I remember correctly, and I think I do, back then, if you were going to be a biology major, you were either going to become a doctor or a dentist.
That's right.
Or teach biology.
That's right.
Those
Yeah.
were the choices.
Those were the choices,
right?
yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you didn't want to go into teaching,
Yeah.
then the other choice was that you were going to go into medicine, right? There was
Yeah.
literally, at that time, I think, next to no concept of going into the biotech
No,
industry.
not at all. That word didn't exist at all. I didn't hear that word till long after college.
Yeah, but you switched over from pre-med.
I switched over
being
for a
a
couple. So
science
my
major.
sophomore year, I had a job in a lab washing dishes, and I was washing dishes in this lab, and I'm watching this postdoc right next to me, and he's got a lab bench right next to me, and I kept looking over at him what he was doing. I'm washing dishes, and I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm pipetting." I said, "Oh, that looks so fun." And he said, "You think pipetting looks fun?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Come here." He said, "I'm giving you a test." So he showed me how to use a pipette man, And he gave me a test, and he came back with the results, and he goes, oh, you pipette better than I do. Forget this. We're getting a new dishwasher. Start pipetting. So I was pipetting in a lab. And here I was, a sophomore, and you couldn't get a lab position when you were a sophomore. You had to at least be a junior or senior before you did those 199s or whatever they're called. And so I was in a lab early, and I loved it. So here I am pre-med, but I'm never leaving the lab. And so it was a great experience.
No,
all
from that
pipetting.
point on, no intention of going medical school.
Well, I still did, and so I thought, well, I got to give this a chance. And so that summer, I got a job in a free clinic, and I went there and I, took patient histories and drew blood and, listened to the doctors. And then every time I finished, I ran back to the lab. So I'd be in the lab for 8 hours, and I'd only be at the clinic for 2 hours, and I'd run back immediately. And I thought, I'm not crazy about sick people or hospitals, so maybe I've made a bad career choice. I'm going back to the lab. So that was where the change really came.
And then when you graduated, you did not go directly to graduate school.
No.
You spent time in the lab after that as a
I
technician.
I did. I got a job as a lab tech, and the reason I got a job as I wanted to go to grad school, but I was completely insecure about it, and I just thought, get a advanced degree? You got to be kidding me. And so I went to UC Riverside, and I got a job as a lab tech in a lab, and worked really hard for 2 years, and just fell in love, absolutely fell in love. And my boss at the time said to me at the end of 2 years, still don't think you can go to grad school? And I was like, no, I think I can do this.
And I'm assuming you weren't pipetting for 2 years, right?
There's a lot of pipetting still involved. Pipetting is still a very important thing.
Well,
no.
what kind of research were you doing when you were in the lab there?
That was pre-molecular biology, so it was all biochemistry. So running a lot of columns and doing a lot of protein assays and running a lot of gels, and I loved every minute of it. And I would never leave. I was there all the time.
And we forget really how primitive that technology was today, right? Running gels, I mean, what would it take, like 2 days to run a gel?
Well, the thing is, we really learned how to do things, though. In a funny way, we were kind of engineers because we had to pour our own columns. You didn't buy a column. You went in the cold room, and you had this long piece of glass, and you had this plumb bob hanging next to it, and you'd make it straight, and then you'd pour the gel in the column, and we poured our own slab gels. You didn't buy a slab gel. And everything was done by hand. And we didn't even buy radioactive ATP. We actually bought inorganic phosphate and labeled it ourselves. So we learned a lot of techniques. I mean, that was the advantage back then. There was no such thing as a kit. No such thing as a kit. So you actually learned a lot.
And now that I think about it, that kit concept actually, this is another story, but was pretty much developed here in San Diego.
That's right.
Really, right?
That's right.
With the predecessor to what was Life Technologies and
Absolutely.
Invitrogen.
Yes,
before
absolutely.
That, San Diego, right?
Yeah.
Get your PhD in 4 years? at UC
PhD in 4
Riverside?
years. Riverside was amazing. It was a great, great school. Loved it.
Next to impossible now, I think, to get your PhD in 4 years.
I never left for 4 years.
So you
I
just-
don't think I left the lab once.
you went straight through, got your PhD.
Well, I think because I had the 2 years as a technician, I was really ready. I really think that made a difference. So maybe you could call it 6 years because of that. That kind of counted, if you will. I already had publications as a lab technician. I knew what I wanted to do. I had my project, and so I think that made a difference. So probably call it 6, but it was 4 years, yeah.
And then off you went after you finished your PhD to NYU.
To
Do
NYU.
your postgrad
Yeah.
at NYU.
Yeah.
What did your parents say when you said, I'm moving to New York?
Oh, boy. So I first was going to move to Baltimore because I was going to a lab in Baltimore because I wanted to make these new things called monoclonal antibodies. And there was a lab at Hopkins that was doing what I wanted to do. And so I was going to move to Baltimore. And then 6 weeks before I moved to Baltimore, the professor called me up, who I was going to work for, and said, we had a big falling out with our department, and we're all moving to NYU. Do you care if you move to New York or Baltimore? And to be honest, I didn't even know the difference. I was like, make a left instead of a right. Sure, no problem, okay. And so it was NYU. I said, great. And so that's how I ended up in NYU. And so I went home that weekend before I left, and my parents were just shaking their head. It was like, why would you go to New York? Why would you do that? And I said, I have to do a postdoc. What do you mean a postdoc? You have your PhD. Aren't you going to get a job? Well, no, I'm not getting a job yet. I have to do this postdoc. Well, how much are you going to make? And I told them, and they were like, you know, all this school, and you're making $7,000 a year? You know, they thought there's, you know, my dad's like, I told you to be a pharmacist. And so, you know, and so I said, no, I got to do this postdoc work. And so before I left that weekend, my parents were very sad and upset about it. And my mother pulled me aside, and she gave me $500 in cash. And she said, don't tell your father that I gave this to you. So I think she'd hidden this $500 and had planned to give it to me. It was very sweet. And so I had my $500, and I tucked it in my jean pockets. And my dad, a little bit later, said, let's go for a ride. So we got in the old pickup truck around the farm, and we went around, and he gave me this big speech about going to New York and being safe. And he says, okay, I've got something to give you. And he reaches under his seat, and he hands me a Saturday night special, a gun. True story. He said, take this gun with you. Now, we'd shot on the farm when I was little, but you know, we shot targets. I didn't go hunting. We shot targets and what have you. He goes, you know how to shoot a gun. And he said, I'm going to take you out and just have you shoot it so you're not afraid of it. I was like, okay. So we go out and we shoot the gun, and he says, just take it with you, throw it in your suitcase, take it to New York, put it under your bed, anyone comes through your door, grab it, and just shoot.
And those were the days where you could just...
Put it in your
How
suitcase.
did you get to New York?
I flew there, and I put it in my suitcase, and I took it. And there's no TSA. Nobody did anything. And so I took my gun with me, and my stuff got put on a truck with some other people that they were moving to New York because I couldn't afford to put my stuff on a moving van, and they said they would take it for me, and so I got my stuff when I got there off this moving van.
And you took your barbecue, too, right?
I did. So I took my barbecue, and I get there, and nobody has a patio. I was like, whoa, how do you guys barbecue? And they were like, what? It's against the law to barbecue in New York City. I had no idea. I said, well, how do you make steaks? You grill them. You know, New Yorkers talk. You just grill them. I was like, oh, brother. And so my hibachi I couldn't even give it away. Nobody wanted it. I really took it. I didn't bring it back. It wasn't worth it.
I could just see you with your...
I know, my barbecue. I know. And the first time I grilled a steak in my apartment that was like 10 feet by 12 feet, I set off all the fire alarms. It was just crazy.
All right, so aside from that,
Yeah.
how was the experience in New York?
It
You were at
was-
Rockefeller University, if I remember
No,
right.
NYU.
NYU? Yeah.
So that was crazy. So, you know, Delano to Irvine to Riverside to New York. And it was a little frightening. New York Medical Center was huge, absolutely huge. And I had a lab bench, and so I could work. It was like 3 feet, and they put tape on either side so you didn't go over your line.
Oh,
And we got there the first day, and they gave me a locker. And I said, what's the locker for? They go, your stuff. I go, oh, my gym clothes? Gym clothes? What do you mean gym clothes? No, it's for your rubber boots and your umbrella and your coat, none of which I owned. I'm from California. Who has that stuff? And so I said, oh, you had a locker, okay. Gym clothes. They were all like talking about me. She thought it was for her gym clothes. I'm like, well, where's the gym? We don't have gym. You have to join a club. How do you join a club? You have to have money. I don't have any money. Well, you don't go to the gym. You know, I had no clue. And so I get there, and at the end of my bench, there was a window, and looking out the window to the bottom was the New York City morgue. And so I saw the cars come in, so the bodies go out. I saw the hearse come. They were much nicer to the bodies when they picked them up than the guys who dropped them off. And so then they would take them, and then across the street, right here, was Bellevue Psychiatric Hospital. So you thought you had a bad day? Look out the window. You had a fine day. Yeah, crazy. It was huge. It was crazy. And it was so different from California, because at Riverside and at Irvine, being in the lab, everyone talks to everybody. Everyone says hello. Everyone shares. So if you're out of something, you go to the lab next door and you borrow it. In New York? No, you don't do that. What do you mean you want to borrow something? What's wrong with you? Didn't you order it? Sorry. And I'd walk down the hall and say, good morning. They're like, oh, she's from California. Yeah, it was crazy. It was crazy. It was hard. It was really, really hard. It was a great education. I had learned a tremendous amount, but it was a tough environment to be in, no question about it.
And you came back to California.
Oh, yes, I came back to California. With those same damn stereo speakers without the barbecue.
All right, so this is where we got lucky because she came back to California. Not only did she come back to California, she came to San Diego. You came
I came
here.
to San Diego, so.
And it was back when Ivor Royston and Howard Berndorf had started the first biotech company, Hypertech, here in San Diego.
Yep.
They were messing around with those monoclonal
Those
antibodies.
monoclonal antibodies.
Nobody knew what to do with those
Nope.
monoclonal antibodies,
Nope.
but they were beginning to figure it out.
Yeah.
And so with all that academic background, you probably had the opportunity to come back and
It was great. It was
join
great.
UCSD. but
Yeah.
you
And I actually was in the process of looking at a postdoc at Salk at the time. And I was going through that, do I want to be in academics? Do I want to be in industry? And that was actually a really, really hard decision at the time. And then I went to Hypertech and I met with everybody. And the funniest part was I was in HR and they said, do you want to talk to the diagnostics group or the therapeutics group? And I'm sitting there thinking, what's the difference? And I was like, I know diagnostic tests and I know therapeutic or drugs, but I don't know which group is a good group to work for. And so I said, oh, can I meet with both of them? She goes, sure. So we'll put you in the diagnostics in the morning, we'll put you with the therapeutic group in the afternoon. And so I met with both of them, and at the end of the day I came back, I said, oh, I want to be in diagnostics. And she said, well, why did you choose that? And I said, because they do everything much quicker. Those pharma people have to wait 11 years before they see anything. I was like, not me, I need to do something in a year. And so that was really how I made the decision to go into diagnostics.
All right, so Hypertech at the time, I'm guessing, it's still not, we'll talk a little bit about the PSA test, but
Yeah.
still had no products, right?
No, had no products.
So
Everybody was in their 20s. You know, Ted Green, who was the president, we thought was really old. I think he was 33. You know, I mean, seriously, it was unbelievable. And it was an incredible group of people. It was a crazy place. It was a crazy place because we didn't know what we were doing. And we just kind of ran around and did it. And that's what was so fantastic about it. We got to do research. We got to transfer products to manufacturing. We got to help in manufacturing. We got to help in product development. We went and we met with the marketing team and picked out the labels to put on the box to ship the kits. And we were involved in everything. Why? Because there was no one else to do it.
Yeah.
And it was fantastic. It was an incredible experience. And I loved every minute of it.
And if when I think about my experience at Mycogen here, which was also early stage company, I remember that we weren't, probably because we were so young, but you weren't afraid to
No.
take those risks
No.
on, right? You
Nobody
almost
said you
didn't
don't know
any
how to
better.
do it.
Exactly, right? You just
You
did
said,
it.
I'll figure it out. No,
Yeah,
that's true.
Whatever it took.
You just did it. Yeah, you just did
But
it.
I can just imagine you spent all this time in college and graduate school, postdoc, and then what'd you tell your parents when you said, oh, I'm going to work for this biotech company, but they don't make anything and they don't have any money?
Well, they were happy to see me back in California. I swear every day they thought I was going to die in New York. And but when I came back and I got offered my job at Hypertech, I got called. I was so excited to get the job offer, and they call me. HR calls and says, "We have a job offer for you." I was like, "Great!" And it's a research scientist, awesome. And it's $28,500. I'm like, "Whoa, okay." And so I called my dad and told him I got a job offer. He's like, "Great." I go, "It's $28,500." And he said, "That's good for a girl." I thought, awesome. And then he said, well, what were you expecting? And here's the funny part. I go, well, 30. That was as big as I could think. I thought if I just could have made 30, I would have been really rolling. So it was a little bit shy of that. And that was my first salary, $28,500.
Did you get stock options along with that?
About 30 stock options.
30 stock options.
I think I washed my car with them when I
Wasn't like you
I
came.
cashed in. Yeah, no.
All right, so I wanted to talk to you a little bit. We've talked a little bit about it because, Hypertech really set the stage for biotech in San Diego. In
Yeah.
a lot of ways, at the same time as Genentech was being formed, and Biogen and other companies.
Amgen.
Amgen and Genzyme in Boston as well. But it was a different culture. It was a different, biotech was a different business then, right?
Completely.
So talk a little bit about how over the time since, because you've gone
Yeah.
through a number of companies and you've been very successful with your companies, but how's it changed?
Oh my gosh, how's it changed? Well, Hypertech was kind of a free-for-all, as I said, and we didn't really care about titles, and we really didn't care about boundaries, because there were no boundaries, and no one thought anything of crossing those boundaries, and I think that's what made it so fun, and that's because there wasn't an example to go by, and everyone just wanted to get the job done, and so it was very, very different, and I didn't know what a job description was, and it didn't matter. You just did whatever you want, whatever had to be done. And I remember one day David Hale, who was president at the time, brought a group of Japanese scientists through the lab, and it was like 8:30 at night, and he was doing a tour, and I was standing on top of the lab bench, pouring a column on top of the lab bench, and I was 8 months pregnant. And he comes walking through and sees me standing on the lab bench in a dress, pouring a column, and all these Japanese pull out their cameras, and click, 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 click. And he was just like this. He's like, "Oh my God, Tina." And it was hilarious. But that's the way it was. Nobody cared. That's just the way, you just did what had to be done.
That's
great.
changed quite a bit.
That's changed a lot,
right?
yeah.
A lot more specialization.
And at that time, everyone was just so excited about biotech and what that word meant. And I remember some of the first meetings I went to for raising money, and when people were trying to get money for biotech companies, nobody even asked you for much of a business plan. No one even asked you for when are you going to put a product on the market? We never even got that question. And I look back and I think about it, and I think, oh my God. And now, you better have 10-year projections and know exactly who you're selling to and what. And so, yeah, it's gotten tougher and tougher as the time has gone, and much more defined over time, absolutely.
But with Hypertech, eventually, Hypertech created and commercialized the PSA test for prostate cancer.
Right.
So, which again is one of the things I like to talk about whenever I travel around. And again, because people know Genentech and, the fact that here in San Diego, we created a groundbreaking, evolutionary, revolutionary, still used test.
Yeah.
It was literally our first biotech product to come out of a biotech company here in
And this
San
whole
Diego.
town, I mean, it's amazing what's still on the market today that was developed from here, even back to those beginning stages.
Yeah.
And this town is phenomenal in what they've contributed, to the world and to patients. And, I was lucky. I got put on the PSA test, and one of the problems they were having with PSA was purifying the PSA out of serum, and all of the products were serum-based. And so we really needed a serum-based test. And when the PSA was purified out, it would just disappear. And so it was a real problem. And so most of the scientists at Hypertech were immunologists, and I was a biochemist, so I had worked with proteins, and I thought, oh, that doesn't sound that hard. And so I worked on that, and about a month later, I went to a meeting and said, oh, I figured out how to purify and stabilize the PSA. And they were like, what? I was like, yeah, it wasn't that bad. I'm a biochemist. And it wasn't any genius. It was what I learned in school. And so I remember David Hale saying, go straight to the patent office. And I was like, okay. And myself and another were on that patent, and we patented the purification and stabilization of PSA, which then allowed us to go on and make the test. And it was really incredible. And looking back, we didn't realize how big that would become. And to this day, people say, oh, I wish there was something better than PSA. It's not a good test. But there still hasn't been anything invented all the way from that time that's actually really replaced it. And so it's actually still used. And, I do have that patent on my wall, bathroom wall, but it's there. And so I can look at it every morning. But it's pretty amazing. And we each got $100, myself and the other scientist.
$100.
$100, because it belonged to the company. And we were both like, woo woo, extra $100. And, you know, it was just amazing to be part of that. But to have your name on that patent to this day is really cool, is really, really cool. And back in those days, men asked me for my phone number, and now they tell me their prostate numbers. And
Yeah, well, I think
real change in life.
A lot of men can thank you for the PSA test for prostate cancer. And obviously, that attracted some attention, and it attracted the attention of the Eli Lilly Corporation, which acquired Hypertech.
Yes.
And things probably changed once you had Eli Lilly come out to take over the company that was, you know, had a
with
wild
all the
west
30-year-olds and
kind of
20-year-olds. And so Eli Lilly had just celebrated their 100th birthday. And we'd been together about, 100 months. And so it was amazingly different. And, and everyone got up the first day, of course, and said, nothing's going to change. And 2 days later, everything changed. So it was quite a shock to all of us. And a year later, everyone really at the top was gone. But it was amazing because I got to go to Indianapolis. I got to see the pharma side. I got to meet incredible scientists. I got to go through their management program. And it was a great experience. So there was a positive from it. The worst part was beer on Fridays disappeared like that. And so we had the TGIFs out on the patio. And the first Friday, we went out there and said, where's the beer? Where's the beer? And it was like, oh, beer's gone. We're like, I thought nothing was changing. Nope, the beer's gone. And, that was the beginning.
Did they leave Hypertech largely intact as a management team? Or?
Not well. Everyone left after about a year, and they ended up not keeping the company in the end. And I think they bought more of a therapeutic company, and they really kind of bought more of a diagnostic company. And so, monoclonal antibodies were first, really being worked on as drugs. And I think it was very hard for the pharmaceutical people to come out. And I remember a lot of the people coming out here from Indianapolis and moving here, and they hated it. They're like, I can't believe I had to move to San Diego. I have such a small house, and there's no lake in front. And it was like they were really, really unhappy moving here. And I'm like, oh, just wait. Sure enough, a few years later, they were all living in San Diego. None of them went back to Indianapolis. They loved it here, and they got hooked.
We were acquired by Dowalenko, which was the ag division in Indianapolis of Lilly, and a partnership with Dow. And I remember the first thing that I realized was we needed to get the starched white shirts and ties off these guys and get them into being a little bit more relaxed.
But when you went to Lilly, everyone was in a starched shirt. Every single person had a jacket on. Every scientist had a tie. If they didn't have it on, they had it behind their door. And if they walked out of their office, they put their tie on. And we had gone there the first time, and we all kind of didn't look so good. And so the second time we went, they kind of said, you need to get a jacket. Like, okay. And gray or blue, don't get red. It was very funny. And you felt it. But it was just the way it was. And there were 3 cafeterias at Lilly. And so depending on your level is what cafeteria you got to go to. So, of course, the bottom level and the mid-level management, and then the top, which was at the top of the Lilly building with windows all around, with red carpet, white tablecloths, china. This was big deal. And no women. And the women there were in finance or were tour guides or in HR, but they were not scientists. And it was just different, and it was really, really different.
I remember getting a phone call right after we were acquired. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I got a phone call from one of the management folks at Dow AgroSciences, and he said, really glad I caught you. And I said, well, where'd you expect me to be at 4 o'clock? And he said, well, don't you guys all go surfing about now?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they really thought, I've heard that too.
And I said, no, we actually go surfing in the morning, so don't call me before 8 o'clock.
Yeah. So a couple years at Lilly, and then it was time to go. I knew it was time to go, and that's when I made my decision to leave.
And you went to another
startup,
Ligand.
Yes, to Ligand
here in San
Pharmaceuticals, which is still down the street in Torrey Pines, which has drugs on the market today that we found back then.
Founded by
Yeah.
Ron Evans, right?
By Ron
Next door
Evans
here
at the Salk Institute,
at
yes.
Salk. So, okay, so how did you build on the experience at Hypertech when you went to Ligand? What was that in terms of the next stage in your experience in?
Well,
in
Ligand was
biotech?
interesting because the initial science that we started didn't work, and it was some other science. And so that was my first experience going, first of all, being at a startup. And being at a startup means ordering the trash cans. It means, getting everything. And that was really different. And I enjoyed it, though. I really, really liked that. Getting space, hiring people, putting things together. So that was my first real startup. And then the science had already been picked out by the venture capitalist. And after about 6 months, I told them that I didn't think it was going to work. And that wasn't the best news to deliver. And they said, and so I told them about my results, and they said, well, would you put more money in this if it was your money? And I said, no. And then, so I didn't know what was going to happen after that. And we did a restart and brought Ron Science over and started again. And so it was my first real startup.
So what did you guys focus on with Ron Science?
So that was all steroid receptor chemistry, and we screened drugs for new steroids. So we had a very large relationship with Pfizer at the time. And so we screened a bunch of their compounds and with all the different receptors that Ron had developed. And his assay was done, in a 10-centimeter big dish, one data point at a time. And we brought it over to Ligand, and we put it in 96 well plates, and we automated it and tested lots and lots of compounds. And so we did robotics. We did it ourselves. We reprogrammed Biomex from Beckman and made it work.
Yeah, because if I remember, not many people were doing robotics in 96 well plates then, right?
No, and
So
that's what we did.
another
We
pioneering
made it work.
kind of a thing.
Yeah, we made it work.
Yeah.
It was great.
But you came to Ligand, you're really not an executive when you came to Ligand.
No.
But you left there as an executive. You spent 4 years there, and you left as a VP, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you emerged from your experience at Ligand, and then it was time for you to move up to really running something,
Yeah.
right, yourself, and you went over with Howard Berndorf to Nanogen,
Nanogen.
which was microarray technology,
Microarray.
DNA hybridization, and you were president and COO.
Right.
So how did that change in your overall experience when you?
Yeah,
when you-
so I think one of the reasons I kind of started making that transition was, first of all, I never really left science. I always have stayed very, very close to it, and that's part of the reason why I love startups and why I love small companies, because the problem is when you're at a large company, you really get pulled away from the science. And I didn't go into science to be pulled away from it. So that was the other great thing about going back to a startup. But I found that one thing that I enjoyed doing was explaining to investors what we were doing, and that's not easy to do. And there's a lot of scientists who just live and breathe science every day, and they would explain to the investors their ideas, and the investors would say, I have no idea what they're talking about. And it was because they just didn't know how to explain it. So I kind of ended up in that role, and that's how I kind of made that transition from the bench to doing more corporate things. And I enjoyed that because it had me on both sides then. Yeah.
And I think when you moved into that role at Nanogen, I think you were doing it at a time when we were seeing a really profound transition in terms of who was running biotech companies, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it really used to be the scientists,
That's right.
CEOs, right?
That's right.
And part of the issue, and I remember going to lots of presentations, was you'd get through a pitch, and it would be, in a 15-minute pitch, it would be 14 and a half minutes of science, and then maybe if you were lucky, here's how I'm going to make you money.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, it was a real change, and it really had to change, and it made sense.
Yeah, and you were able to basically
Kind of
translate
cross
it
that, yeah, and I
cross
enjoyed
it
that.
cross
And I
that.
don't have an MBA, and I didn't know business really then, and kind of had to learn it.
And then you left and did your first startup, which was Genoptix. I remember I visited you down in Sorrento Valley.
Yep,
in
where we
your,
started.
When it first started down
Yes.
there. And I remember you moved into a building that actually you planned for expansion because you had a lot of space in that building. I remember the top floor, I think, kind of looked like you could have turned it into a roller skating rink. It was,
We did roller skate in there.
but Genoptix actually became one of the largest medical testing labs in the U.S., looked at leukemia and lymphoma. You went public in 2007. You eventually sold it to Novartis for close to $500 million in 2011. That must be very satisfying for you.
Yeah.
But when you accomplished all that, I thought, okay, she's done it all, right? She's been successful starting a biotech company. It's every entrepreneur's dream to create a company that's successful, sell the company for a good profit for the shareholders, for everyone in the company. That's important as
Yes,
well.
yes.
So that must have been great, right?
It was great. Yeah, it was great. The only bad thing is they didn't get the $475 million.
Yeah, okay. But you didn't stop.
No.
You didn't stop.
No, I loved it. I loved building that company. It was amazing. We found a market need. We found a niche that wasn't
Yeah.
being fulfilled well.
Can you talk a little bit about Genoptix, just so folks understand better what went on at Genoptix?
Yeah, and what's really interesting about Genoptix is we didn't have any proprietary technology, which was very, very unusual because for a company to be successful, you need proprietary technology. In that particular case, we just found a niche, and that was that testing for leukemia and lymphoma just wasn't being done in a way that was satisfying to physicians. And we started talking to physicians and just saying, well, are you happy with your labs and the samples you send out and what you get back? And they said, yeah, for the most part, we're happy. And then we said, is there an area where you're not satisfied? And what we heard over and over again was in this area of leukemia and lymphoma. And we're like, well, why? And they said, well, it's a bone marrow sample. It's not a blood sample. It's not a urine sample. It's a bone marrow sample. It's an incredibly valuable sample, very difficult, very painful to take from the patient. And then it gets sent to these labs, and it gets sent all over the United States, and we have to wait for the results to come back, and we get part of our cytogenetic results back from North Carolina, and we get our PCR results back from Irvine, and we get this result back from Texas because these large labs had these areas of excellence where they did one technology. And with this particular disease, they would get all these reports back, and they would look at them, and they would say, I don't know what's wrong with my patient. And even worse, once in a while, a sample would be misplaced because that happens with these large companies. When you're getting 60, 70,000 samples a day, there are a certain percent of them that get lost. Well, if it's urine or blood, it's not that big a deal. But if it's a bone marrow, it is a big deal. And so the time to get the sample back, the time to get it to the lab, the time to get the testing, the time to look at the results, and the docs were like, I don't even know what to do with my patient. These results don't make sense. So we thought, opportunity. And I have to say, we really would not have known what to do if we hadn't gone out and talked to the customer. And so you always hear that from everybody, go talk to the customer, and you think, yeah. But it really is true. You think you know what people want, but till you get out there. And if I was to give any entrepreneur advice on something they want to do, it's really going out and finding out who your customer is from the very beginning, because that makes such a difference in the direction you go, and really understanding how to build the company from that. So when we saw that, we said, let's do it differently. Let's have all the testing in one spot. Let's bring doctors in, hematopathologists, to help us with the diagnosis of these leukemia and lymphomas, and let's give back to the physician a comprehensive report that tells them exactly what's wrong with their patient. The other thing we did is I came back that day from hearing about these lost samples, and I had this email from Amazon, and it told me that my $5 book was in Anaheim, and I was going to get it tomorrow at 10 o'clock. And I thought, you know what? I know where my $5 book is, but these doctors don't know where their bone marrow samples are. That doesn't sound right. So I called up FedEx. I lied my way to the top and got to the vice president. And I said to him, I have this idea. I want you to come and talk to us. And He said, well, actually, I come to Carlsbad once in a while. He says, one of my biggest clients is Callaway Golf. I was like, fantastic, we're right next door. And I said, would you come see us? And he said, sure. So he came out. I said, I will convince you that leukemia is more important than golf. And I did. And so we were one of the first companies that hooked up with FedEx with samples like we had, and we monitored every single solitary sample. And so we told every doctor where their sample was at all times. And that helped really, make a great product. It was really delivering what was needed.
And you had many, many hematopathologists on your staff who communicated with the doctors.
Exactly.
So you had that back and forth doctor-to-doctor communication.
Exactly.
as
So we had
well.
45 physicians on staff.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Nobody's ever managed in their life till they've managed 45 doctors.
Well, that's kind of cool. You start out in pre-med, and then you ended up having the doctors work for you at the end of the whole thing.
You know what they say, the A's work for the C's.
Well, I thought you were, once that happened, I think we had a conversation. You said, well, I'm done with all this now, but that lasted like a year.
Not that long.
Yeah. And then you were recruited to become the president and CEO at Molecular Stethoscope, which measures circulating DNA. It was started...
RNA.
Circulating RNA, I'm
Yes.
sorry. Started by Eric Topol and Steve Quake up at
Steve Quake at Stanford, that's correct.
at
Yeah.
Stanford. So
Yes.
this is really cool, right?
Yes.
This is
Yes.
really timely, genomics-focused
Yes.
kind of work
Yes.
that you're doing now. Tell us a little bit about that.
Molecular biology, I love it. And yeah, it's very, very exciting. First of all, I was at Illumina for a year and a half, and so I really only did take a month off between when I said I was retiring. And during that month, I was in a really, really bad car accident. Most people don't know that. I kind of kept that quiet. And on the 5 freeway, this woman ran into me, and my car flipped and everything. And anyway, my car was totaled. And I walked away from it, and when the tow truck driver came to the accident, he said whoever was driving that car didn't survive. And I was standing there. And it was really, I know everyone says that there's these life-changing moments, and there was this life-changing moment. And I said, I got to go do something again. I can't, my time wasn't up. And I know that sounds funny, but I really felt that way. And so, I had to get back at it, and I did. And I wanted to do another startup, and I was lucky enough to have Eric and Steve come to me and say, hey, we're doing this great company, and in circulating RNA, and it sounds so cool, and liquid biopsy, and instead of having to go get a piece of tissue and being able just to take a blood sample is so incredibly exciting, and it's a new field. Yep. And I really, really love it. And we're working on liver disease, a disease called NASH, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, which is a big problem in this country. It's basically fatty liver. Basically, we eat too much. And it's a problem, and your liver gets fibrous, and you've got a lot of problems. So.
And what stage is the company now?
Step 1. We just bought our sequencer. We got a Xerox machine.
Sounds like Hypertech all over again.
I know. We got the trash
Here we are.
cans. The staplers have been bought. Yeah.
It's like it's come full circle.
Yeah, it has.
You can't get away from
No,
it.
I know.
That's what I
I
love
know.
about working with
I
you.
know.
No,
I love it.
it's
I just
awesome.
love what I do. I'm so lucky. I'm so lucky.
So let's just get to being a woman in this whole field for a couple of minutes. You're the first woman to be chair of Biocom. You were the first woman here in San Diego to win the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year award in life sciences. As you've progressed all the way up through the ranks, and I kind of know the answer to this, but I want folks to hear about it. Did you feel as though you needed to act differently, or that you were treated differently as a woman?
There were certainly times when I was treated differently. There were certainly times I felt that it was a problem that I had to overcome. But I think one thing, back to Mr. Hyatt at the high school, I just didn't let go, and I didn't stop, and I didn't let anything or anyone get in my way. But I wasn't tough about it. I wasn't like, I've got to prove myself. I'm going to push these men aside. I didn't feel like I I didn't want to change a culture. I didn't want to change how other people were. I wanted them to accept me for me, and I wanted to fit in and not be the odd person out. And there were times, yeah, I felt that way, of course. But, you know, when I look back, I think that was one of the greatest things about being part of startups and small companies, is really the venture people who support you really don't care what you are. They want you just to work and
Be successful.
be
and
successful
Give them a return
and
on
work
their investment.
as hard as you can. And so that's why I have really loved small companies.
You're on a number of boards.
I am.
What are your criteria for joining boards? You probably won't join a board because they want a woman on the board, right?
I will not join a board. I do get those phone calls. Hello, hi, Tina, yes. We'd really like to talk to you about our company. We really, want to talk to you about our board. We really need a woman to meet our criteria of meeting. I just say, thank you so much for calling me. Goodbye. I don't ever want to get on a board for that reason. I want to get on a board because of my experience and because they think that there's something I can bring to the table. And being a female can be a positive, of course. And I hear that. If I hear that at the end, I'm okay. I don't want to hear it at the beginning. And so, yeah, and the criteria is just doing some exciting science and something different than I do. And it's really fun, participating in a company that way. When you're the CEO of a company, you have to do everything. When you're on a board, you get to walk in once a quarter, tell them what to do, eat their lunch, and leave. It's great.
If we can, let's stay on this topic for a little bit
Yeah.
longer here.
Yeah.
I know we're going to run out of time soon, but
Yeah.
I just want to take it just a little farther. We were at a great dinner that we did a couple of weeks ago for Cindy Collins, the new
Yes.
CEO of Human Longevity. And great to have Cindy in town. We had women, men at the dinner, but we eventually, the conversation began to turn a little bit to, gee, there is a great group of women around the table here, but there aren't many more in San Diego
Yeah.
in CEO roles in life science. And you sent me a very interesting study the next day that actually said that the beginning of all of this is that women don't enter early management roles as much as men do. And
Yeah.
so they thin out through the ranks as people move up. And so how have you addressed that in all these companies
Yeah.
that you?
So I think that article was very interesting. It came out from Lean In organization and McKinsey. It's called Women in Tech 2016, if you want to look it up. And if you can't find it, I'd be glad to send it to you. But it shows men and women in entry-level positions and what the percents are. And men were like 54, and women were 40-something. And then as it went through up to the C-suite, women became 19%, and the rest were male. And so you just saw the drop-off. You saw the men go up, and you saw the women go down. And it's happened year after year after year. But it has gotten better. There have been improvements. So if you look at the 2015 numbers, they're better. 16 is better than 15, 15 is better than 14, and it's just slow, and it's going to take time, but there is now some movement and has been in the last 5 years. And I have a really good friend who's a recruiter, and she told me, oh, it's so great now. Everyone's calling up and saying, I only want to interview women. Like, wow. And so there really is some great movement happening. And I think it's awareness. I think there has been a big change. And I find that men at the top are, once they have daughters, things change.
Yeah.
Things change.
Look at Donald Trump.
Take your child to work day.
That's exactly.
He's done it in spades.
We agreed we wouldn't get into this one, right?
We said no politics.
But again, just to stay with it for
Yeah.
a second,
Yeah.
You've just given so much to groups like Athena. You've gone into the schools to introduce kids to biotech, and you've given women the opportunity to prove themselves in the companies that you've run. And my experience in San Diego has just seriously been that once women do get up to that level, there are actually some things about women in senior management
Yeah.
levels that
Yeah.
sometimes make it a little bit more of a stable environment than it is.
I think there's a lot to be said for that. I think, one of the hardest things being a woman on a lot of these boards is getting a word in edgewise. I'm serious. That's one of the toughest things.
We never saw that on the Biocom board.
No, we never saw that ever. Never. And I think women, are more polite about jumping in. I think they listen a lot better. I think they're very sympathetic to employees and what they need to do. And they do think differently. And it isn't, women don't, we were always told we need to fit in to the board, to the boards. And I think now we need to say just the opposite. Those male boards need to value us and what we bring to the table and value that for the contribution that women make to those companies and flip that around. And that's what we need to see.
But again, you know what? I want to tell you, Tina and I had this conversation probably, I'm going to say 15 years ago. And your answer hasn't changed in 15 years, right? So
Yeah.
she understood it and practiced it a long, long time ago, and I appreciate that. Let's just talk about some other things briefly, okay? We first of all, we said we weren't going to talk about life balance, because you've raised two great kids.
I have
and
two great
I want to give you a
kids.
chance to talk
Thank
about
you.
your kids a little bit.
I have
because-
two great kids. My daughter is a director of marketing for Old Navy in San Francisco. She has a great job. Hates science, of course. Honey, why do you hate science? Because you took me to the lab every weekend. That's what she said. And I remember having her baby blanket on the floor while I fed my cells. And she's like, oh, science, So the poor kid totally messed her up. And then my son is a psychology major and is still in college. And right now he's reading all these psychology books. And then when he comes over, he tries to analyze me. And I said, you can analyze anybody but your mother. Anybody. And so, no, I have two wonderful children. And it's a wonder because when they were kids, I remember hearing, why aren't you ever the room mother? But they didn't like my cookies anyway. But they, and they knew that. They knew that. But they also admired what I was doing. And they knew that I loved what I was doing. I think that was really the key for me. Yeah. I was very fortunate that they came out so wonderful.
And you probably instilled in them the understanding that they should, whatever they want to do, they should love what they're doing.
Yeah, and,
right?
and they are.
Important thing.
They are.
You've given quite a bit of time to our stem cell initiative in California. You served on the Independent Citizens Oversight Committee of the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, which I serve on now.
Yes.
That was another pioneering initiative, right?
It was.
$3 billion that basically wasn't passed. Probably many of you don't know, that wasn't passed by the state legislature. That was a citizens' initiative.
The voters.
That, the voters
Yeah.
decided to spend $3 billion on. How do you think we've done?
Well, first of all, I have to tell you that Cruz Bustamante, who was the lieutenant governor, is the person who appointed me to the board. And he was looking for a Hispanic woman that was a CEO in biotech, and unfortunately, I was the closest that he could find. And he was so excited when he found out I was from Delano, because he's from the Central Valley. So that was the one time that being from Delano got me this incredible position. But first of all, I think we're lucky to have you on that board, and I think it's done tremendous things for California. We've brought so many talented scientists to California because of that initiative. San Diego has benefited a lot from that initiative. We built a lot of infrastructure, some beautiful buildings. Some people criticize that. Actually, this place had money from that initiative, a portion of what it took to build this. And we've trained a tremendous amount of postdocs and scientists with that initiative. And now there's, I don't forget how many, 20-some drugs that are in clinical trials. They're not on the market yet, so it's been criticized, but it takes time. That was new science, and you need to make sure, you just can't go injecting stem cells without doing all the safety work, but it's coming. Yeah. And I think it's extremely exciting what's happened.
It's great. It may have been oversold, but sometimes you have to do that to get something like that passed.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be the responsibility of all of us, a lot of folks here, all of you too, to make sure that the lay public understands that you don't just start something like this and have a new drug on the market
That's
in 5
right.
years.
That's
You know, the average in the pharmaceutical industry in biotech is 15
Long
years.
time, long time.
So, all right, so I'm going to close this up. I want to ask you one question. I remember about 3 or 4 years ago, we invited Governor Brown to our annual dinner.
Oh, God.
And I was sitting there at the table with Governor Brown. We were in the middle of a conversation. In the middle of it all, he said, I want to ask you something. I said, what, Governor? He said, is Tina Nova here? And I said, well, yeah, actually she is. And I motioned to Jimmy Jackson, our VP of Public Policy, can you go and find Governor Brown? So he did. He brought Governor Brown over, and I decided it was time to leave. And you two sat and talked. Would you like to share with us what you talked about?
Absolutely not.
All right. I just thought I'd try again. See?
That's very private, Joe. But it does go to say something about my taste in men. No, I met Jerry a long, long time ago, and we've been friends for a long time. And he always calls me. He calls me once in a while and says, "I got a question about this biotech stuff." That's what he always says, is biotech stuff. And so he wanted to ask me some biotech stuff, and
All right, I'm sure
and he's
he
been a
gave
friend
it
for a long time, and he's really a terrific. He's a brilliant, brilliant man.
He really is, and,
Yeah.
and he's been great for this industry.
Yeah.
All right, on that note, I think if it's okay with you.
Well, I have one other thing to say, and that is that we have you to thank for the incredible community that we have here today.
Oh, thank you.
And this community would not be the same without Joe Panetta. And you are being honored on June 8th for a Lead Visionary Award for the contribution that you've made to this region. And I really mean that. San Diego is not number 2. San Diego's number 1. Because when you talk to people from Boston and you talk to people from San Francisco, they don't have what we have here. And they want to have what we have here. As we know, actually, they've tried to combine with us in the past, and we fought hard and said, nope, we're staying independent. We're San Diego. And congratulations on your award, because boy, do you deserve it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, but it wouldn't be what it is without you and all the folks who work together to make this number 1. So I hate awards like that, but thank you very, very much. Let's open it up for questions, okay?
You could come up to the microphone so we can capture it.
Over here? Yeah, okay. The mic's, is that the mic, the only mic right there?
There's one on both sides.
Okay, great.
They're live.
How can you claim?
Can you speak up? I'm sorry.
How can you claim this is the #1 biotech community when obviously in this room there's a lack of representation, specifically with African Americans, and 2, less apparently, there's a sense of subconscious racism. How can you claim that this is the #1 biotech community when that's obviously apparent?
So, as a woman and as a person who cares about this subject very much, and I spend a lot of my time with young women of color, encouraging them to go into the sciences. Unfortunately, we still don't see the numbers in the sciences to choose from. And I can tell you that if I look at the number of resumes that I get and the number of people that I interview, that we don't see the numbers that we should be seeing, that you would hope to see. And I think that with time, it's getting better. It is changing. And I can tell you that the majority of the company that I run today is not white American, actually. And so there have been changes, and not necessarily with African Americans and not necessarily with Hispanics, but with some other races. We have a couple people from Spain. We have a couple people from the Middle East. We have people from Asia. And it is changing compared to how it used to be. I think it's a really important point. We have to have the same awareness with minorities that we have with women that we've been talking about. And when I say that San Diego's #1, I see a community that's very focused on that and really wants to do something about that. And I've been part of groups that have had that discussion. And at least we're having the discussion. Can it be better? You bet it can. I agree with you.
I feel like you don't care. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
Tina, I share your enthusiasm for entrepreneurship. Been involved in it for a good time myself. But when you think back to all the times that you've, the different experiences you've had, there are different components of being an entrepreneur. There's funding issues. There's money's always, a challenge. Science, the value, the validity of what you're doing is of course important. There's the board and the team, not only the core team that you put together, but your board of directors have influence over how the business develops. If you were to, I know they're all important, but if you were to look back and say, hey, what's the key ingredient that without which, I know it's hard,
Yeah.
or maybe if you prioritize,
Yeah.
what's the most important thing you say?
People.
That's the
People, people, people. It's having people who come in and care about it as much as needs to be done to start these companies and to really think about why are we there. And I was, being flippant with my $460 million comment. People don't go into science for that reason. People go into science because they love what they do. And we go into science because of the patients. And if we can deliver something like the PSA test, like the tests I've been involved with in the past, you feel like a winner. And it takes a team of people to do that. And I can, out of all that stuff, if I have the right team of people who really believe in what we're doing and really care about it and work together as a team, which is just as important as anything else. I will not hire people who come in and I don't feel like they can have have degrees from wherever, they can be Harvard, whatever, doesn't matter. If we feel like they can't come in and really contribute in a team environment, we're not going to hire them. And so number one is people that are dedicated to the cause, and it's not too hard to weed them out, believe me. And the rest of it will come. I really believe, because if you have the team, yeah, the science has got to work, right? The science has got to work to get the money. You get the money, you got the board, But I would say people are number one.
So speaking of people, I believe we have students in the audience. Do we have students, postdocs, grad students? Stick your hands up. Excellent. Love to see that. You're all very welcome. What would you say to our students, the future entrepreneurs? What was the one piece of advice you give them?
Well, I hope one of my takeaways was don't let anything get in your way. Because I have to tell you that many times I felt bad about, I had obstacles in front of me that I didn't feel good about. There were occasions when I didn't feel good about where I was and what I was doing and trying, my kids and trying to balance everything, and the science doesn't work and we got to start over. And there's times where it was really, really rough. And believe me, this is a tough, tough job. It's a very tough job. But if you just say, hey, I'm not stopping, I'm not going to let that get in my way, I'm going to keep going. People say this, you can do anything. I'm proof of it. I came from a high school that didn't have calculus. I was in a that said, why are you going to a four-year university? I went there, I was scared, I didn't know anybody, and it would have been so easy to turn around and go back home and marry Al and make lunch and all of that and drive my tractor. But I knew that wasn't what I wanted to do, and so I really never, ever stopped. I also have always stood up for what I thought was right. And sometimes that's tough too. But if you really believe in something, you got to do that too. It's not easy, believe me. Are there days when I left work and got in my car and just turned up the Rolling Stones and said, oh my God, that was an awful day. The Rolling Stones made me feel good. Yeah, and there's days when I didn't know the science was going to work. There were days when I didn't think I could raise the money. There were days when all of that. And you just got to keep at it. And I think it's one of the hardest things. It's not easy. It's not easy.
I have a question. I'm an independent college advisor, so I work with high school
Boy, Joe, maybe you should talk about your education
Yeah.
group.
Because we're doing a lot to try to give students the opportunity to understand what the field is all about and what the career opportunities are and what kinds of backgrounds people have. But I think one of the things we're seeing, and we in the Biochem Institute, I think we can help you with this, is that there are more biotech majors. For example, Cal State San Marcos has an undergraduate major in biotech now. One of the things that Tina and I have worked on with Shelley Schuster up at the Keck Graduate Institute is a master's degree in a Master of Science in Biotech with a business biotech balance within that program. So I think we're seeing more of those degrees, and throughout the CSU system they exist. I'm not sure how many universities have biotech degrees. Maybe we're unique at Cal State San Marcos. I think UCSD has a biotech degree, though, as well. So and you can comment more on this. I think one of the reasons we got involved in this master's in biotech was that the fact is that biotech companies are small, very collaborative, very tight enterprises where people benefit by being able to have one foot on either side of the aisle.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And I think one thing to share with students is that there's many jobs in biotech. It's not just, I think a lot of times when I talk to high school students, they think it's just being stuck at a lab bench and you're like some nerd and, and you don't talk to anybody. And there's this this misconception about what it's like to be a scientist. It is such a collaborative job. You talk to people all the time, and that's how you do science nowadays. And so I think sharing with that, but at Genoptix, when we were large, we had PhDs in sales, we had PhDs in marketing, we had PhDs in customer service, we had PhDs all over, every department in the company, because we needed scientists at those levels to also help sell or plan or do whatever, because we're selling science, right? And so a lot of students don't realize that the options are not just be at the lab bench, and I think it'd be great to share that with students. The other problem is there's a lot of students that aren't great in math, so they think that they cannot be a scientist, and that's just not true. I mean, you just have to get through the classes, and I don't do any math. We have mathematicians when we need math. We have bioinformatics when we need math. We have physicists when we need math. And so, I used algebra and statistics more than anything else. Those two I used my whole career. But did I ever use calculus? No. But did I have to get through the class? Yes. But I think a lot, especially women, get discouraged because of the math, and they think, I'd love to go into science, but I'm not great in math. They just need to get through the classes. And then there's some options for them. And some, it would be better to do some of the business over the science, and for some it's better to do the science over the business, depending on which role they want to go in. But I don't think they know that much about it. So your point's a good one. We've got to do a better job to help with that. It's a great point. You need to work with Joe, and we need to work on that.
We'll connect you with the Institute.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
Paul, how are we on time?
I was just going to say, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap it up there. I'll just finish by saying I learned a lot tonight, but one thing in particular I learned, I had absolutely no idea how Greek families and Irish families were so much alike. But in all seriousness, you're both very welcome to hang out with us anytime you like. It was a pleasure having you. You're an inspiration both to me and to everybody in the audience, I'm sure. So thank you so much for coming.
That's really kind of you. Thank you.
Anytime. Let's give them all a round of applause.
Tina, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
I've actually looked forward to this for a long time. I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
So there is a bit of a reception out back. There's food. Please go out, mingle, and thank you all for coming.